And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I am your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. We are going to talk about Steelers free agency grades today. And we're going to break down the scouting trail, Shayne, something I think is really important when it comes to determining who could this first round pick be by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know last year you and I were able to really have Broderick Jones slated as our top guy when it was all said and done, based on all the stops along the way. And so we're going to talk about who that guy might be a little bit early in the process here, as we're about a month out from the draft. And we're going to break down everything that's happened in free agency so far. But Shayne, first, let's talk about some of the news happening around the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Just as of yesterday, Shayne, the Steelers signed running back Cordero Patterson. If I've ever seen an Arthur Smith move, this is it right here. I mean, it didn't come as a surprise, even though the Steelers have Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. This team did not have a third running back who carried the football for them last year. So it is a little bit interesting to sign a guy with a reputation like Patterson has now. He's 33 years old at this point. But let's talk about what that means for the team. How do you think he's going to be used, Shayne?
Well, honestly, if I'm being just looking at the tea leaves of when this happened and everything else, I think there's one major reason he was signed, and it's to be the kick returner, at least for this team, because as we all saw, the kick return rules have changed. They set them up kind of like the XFL did a couple years ago, which I personally am a big fan of. I don't want special teams to die. I don't want it to fall away. And we've kind of been seeing that, especially with kickoff the last couple of years, more so than ever. So having these rules is going to make the game more interesting. It's make it more fun. It's going to make special teams more important on that side of things. So I'm for it for the most part. I know some people aren't, but besides the point, that is probably the top reason why Cordero Patterson's on the team, because not only can he be a third running back, I think he's still good enough to do that, but now he can also play special teams, which is something that they've always wanted out of their third back. And he might be one of the more impactful ones, even at the age of 33. I still think he can be a really good kick returner, maybe do some punt stuff too, depending on Calvin Austin and what he does. But just that feels like it's definitely that role, the kick returner and third running back if we need him.
Yeah, the kick return in the NFL is going to have such a different feel this year.
So different.
If you're not familiar with how that works, I think they line up at the 30 and 35, like the
receiving team in front of them. Yeah.
So you're not having like these head-on like collisions going
not
20 miles an hour this way and that way. And so it should prevent injuries that way. And it should make the game a little bit more exciting. They've incentivized that kickoff now where you really want to return that ball, because then I can't remember all the specific details off the top of my head right now,
like
but
touchbacks
basically don't want to kick it.
You don't want to kick it
in the
end zone, stuff like that. Yeah. So
this makes
incentivized.
Exactly. And so I feel like even getting an aged kick returner, one who was a former 3-time All-Pro at what he does, I'm a fan of this move, Shayne. I don't know how he's going to be used on offense. I think it'll probably be sparingly. I would have to imagine behind the running back duo the Steelers already have right now. Maybe they bring him in on some of these jet sweep plays and try to find creative ways to get him the ball. But I think the primary use here is for special teams, because that kickoff means a lot more now than it did last year. You can't fair catch the ball anywhere this year like you could last year. So really, I mean, the rules that were in place last season, Shayne, completely devalued the kick return.
Yeah, it was pointless. It was pointless, yeah.
So I think this is going to add to that. And it's worth mentioning the Steelers have not returned a kick for a touchdown since 2017. I mean, it's been a hot minute. So maybe Patterson can change that this year for them. And so we'll see what happens with that, but it's a 2-year contract. And so I think that the plan is to get him involved primarily on special teams. Excuse me. All right, Shayne, let's talk about a visit the Steelers had today, one that wasn't surprising. And it really puts this guy firmly on the map right now. And that was Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims. The Steelers, they saw him at the NFL Combine. They used a formal combine visit on him. Tomlin and Khan saw him at Georgia's Pro Day. So there's 2 boxes he checks. Now he checks the third one, Shayne, by getting the top 30 in-house pre-draft visit by the Steelers. That's the trifecta. That is what we look for when it comes to determining who a first-round pick could be for the Steelers. He checks all of those boxes. He comes at a premium position. He comes at a position of need. He obviously tested as a very good athlete in respect to his size, of 95th percentile according to relative athletic score. He's checking every single box the Steelers look for in a first round pick. The one thing that he doesn't have to his resume is very, very limited college experience. I
Yeah,
mean, started 8 games in college and wasn't able to finish some of those games because of nagging injuries. But everything else he checks. What do you make of this, Shayne?
Again, like you said, no surprise here. I think for a while now, he's been kind of the guy that I've been kind of putting into that first round pick spot for a good while now. And
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense. You need a right tackle so that way Broderick can go back to left where he should be playing. I'm hoping the Steelers are starting to learn that if you play the guys at the right spot, they might be pretty good. You know, Kevin Dotson just got a pretty big contract playing his normal right guard spot.
Mhm.
You know, I think that I'm hoping they're learning from that. I hope that that's the target is a right tackle, or at least somebody who can play right tackle consistently. That makes sense from that perspective. An athlete, like you said, really the only downside with him is it's a little hard to determine how good of a player he is right now and how good he can become because we
Yeah.
just didn't get to see a lot of him, right? I think the benefit of that is, maybe he hasn't had time to form bad habits. Teams haven't gotten a chance to get a good look at what he's good or bad at. So you hope that with all that skill that he does have and all the talent, they can develop him into being an upper echelon right tackle. And then you have your bookends for a decade, you hope, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm not surprised to see that. And we'll see, kind of as we go along, if anyone else also hits these marks, because it's going to be a little different this year. We'll talk about that later. But
yeah, it's absolutely different so far. I mean, the amount of visits that Tomlin and Khan have had along the way are small in comparison to years past. So we'll get to that later in the show. But I'm excited about this visit. I love that Mims is a guy that's on the map. I know how important, obviously, this position is. And the Steelers have undervalued it for so long now. I mean, taken one offensive tackle in the Kevin Colbert era, as long as he was there, over 2 decades. And so I think that they're finally starting to put an emphasis on that. And Mims is a guy that is very intriguing to me. All right. We'll get to this later in the show. I want to break down everything that we know about the draft and the pre-draft scouting trail so far. But we're going to get to some free agency stuff here. The Pittsburgh Steelers is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure you use code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Remember to always game responsibly. Please scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. And did we lose it, Shayne? Did we lose our QR code?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened. We might have to get that fixed. But
we will get that up next time. Apologize for the inconvenience.
What you want to put in? It's FANSIDED2.
FANSIDED2. All right. Shayne, let's get on to our free agency grades here. I know that it's early. Some people hate when we do this kind of stuff before you ever get to see these guys in action. And I understand that, but I want to share kind of our initial thoughts on all the moves that the Steelers have made so far. And we're going to keep this to the external ones. So not the players the Steelers have re-signed, but rather the guys that they have brought in from outside the organization. We'll kind of go right down the line here. And I would just want to get, like, off the top of your head, what kind of grade would you assign to each of these free agent moves? And then we're going to talk about what else needs to be done so far. So Shayne, let's kick things off with Russell Wilson. I mean, the Steelers were able to get him obviously at a discount of $1.2 million, the veteran minimum, for a guy who has a lot of past playoff experience in a Super Bowl ring, albeit this coming a long time ago. Hard to beat that price, right? What do you got?
So I go with a B, because I think that you can't give it anything lower than that because it doesn't cost you basically anything. 1.2 million in the NFL is essentially free. That's kind of what it comes down to. I can't really fault them for doing this for a guy that's experienced. But ultimately, the reason it's a B and not an A is because I just don't think he's that great of a player anymore, unfortunately, right? I mean, you hope that he can, if he does end up being the starter for the full season, you hope he can give you better quarterback play than we've been getting. Not a huge hurdle to climb or to jump over, but still, it's what you kind of need him to do. And ultimately, there's no harm in this move, regardless. Either he starts and is okay, and it's $1.2 million. He's bad. You just go to Justin Fields. Or if he doesn't play at all, just, again, it's a really cheap backup because backups cost 4 times that much not nowadays. So it's honestly just a straight along, like, B, totally fine move. So.
Yeah, Shayne, my grade would be different had the Steelers done things in a different order. Like, I think my grade for Russell Wilson is a B-, and it's because at the time, I wanted them to pursue Justin Fields. I wanted them to go out and get an option that had a little bit more upside. And so if this move would have been done in response to the other one, and there's like you're signing a backup in Wilson veteran, for that price tag. I mean, that's like an A+ move to me. You get that guy in the building,
right? And
it just you have one of the most stable second options in the league, I should say. Russell Wilson, the plan is for him to be the starter. I think Tomlin's reiterated that, although he didn't close the door completely on quarterback competition. But I'm going with a B- for Russell Wilson. I think that I think he probably ends up being somewhere between like the 16th and 22nd best quarterback in the league this year. Like, I think that he'll be better than he was in Denver just because the organization in Pittsburgh is that much better.
Right.
But I just don't have hope that he's going to be anything more than like an average starter in comparison to the rest of the league. And I think that that's the most important way to look at it. It's not, is he going to be better than Pickett, which I think that he certainly will be, but how is he going to be compared to the rest of the league? That's what you're looking at here. And more importantly, the rest of the AFC that is suddenly stacked with quarterbacks. Some of them didn't even play last year, like Anthony Richardson and Aaron Rodgers. And so we're getting these guys now that it just more competition added in there. And we know the importance of the position. So B- for me on that one. Let's go over to, let's do Cameron Johnston, the punter edition.
Gotta get the punter.
Steelers. We can't forget the punter here. This is a team that predicates themselves off of running the ball and having good field position. So this is more important than it is for most teams. What do you give the Cameron Johnston grade here?
Well, he's not Presley Harvin, so it kind of automatically gets an A. They addressed it. They aren't playing around anymore. It's a punter that has experience in the league. He's been a pretty good punter in the past. It's fine. It's a cheap contract. Anytime you pay a special teamer, especially like a punter, a ton of money, it's not great, but it's not a ton of money. It's 3 years, $9 million. It's, right in line with like average punter contracts. It's totally fine. I think that it gets a guy in there that I at least expect to be good, right? That's kind of the problem that's been for the past few years. As much as we wanted Harvin to be great, just never really happened for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good with the Cameron Johnston signing. I think that the more that I looked into him, the more that I liked him in terms of being able to pin the ball inside the 20, beam the ball pretty far. The hang time is not on par with like the best of the best. I think Tommy Townsend would have been the obvious choice here at the same price. But we'll see how these guys do on their second contracts here. And I think that Johnson is obviously going to be an upgrade over what this team had in Harvin. So no questions about that. Patrick Queen, Shayne, I know that this one, he wasn't really high. You weren't the highest on Patrick Queen, I should say. I know he was a Pro Bowler last season. A lot of people went nuts over this signing. What do you make of it? What kind of grade would you assign to this?
So if the contract had been structured worse than it is, I probably would have given it like a C. Because the contract is one where you can get out of pretty quickly if you want to. I'll give it a B. I think it's going to be an upgrade at the position, especially over what we had when guys went down last year. I think you factor in the fact that we're not sure about the health of the guys in the room at this point, outside of him. So even Roberts got banged up some last year, like Holcomb being out possibly the whole year. We don't really know what his deal is going to be. I think it's a position that definitely needed to be targeted. And for the amount of money they spent, considering it's not a long-term investment, realistically, if they don't want it to be, I think it was a good way to shore things up. And again, if he hits the way he has been, if he continues to play like he has, even away from Roquan Smith, then it's going to be a really nice deal ultimately. And you probably won't have to get out of it at all the whole time. So I will say, because of the way it's structured, I'm a little less, worried about it at this point.
Okay. Shayne, I'm going to ruffle some feathers here. I gave a C+ to the Patrick.
Okay, so right around
signing. Okay. And I know that that's going to go against the grain with a lot. What a lot of Steelers fans are thinking here. I know Cole Holcomb's injury, and you need to improve the linebacker play overall. Like, it was abysmal last year.
It was,
I think obviously in large part due to Holcomb and Alexander ending up on IR, missing half the season.
Right.
But the biggest reason for that, Shayne, is, and again, I do like the way the contract is structured. But you are still, in a per year average, you're dishing out $13.66 million per year to a linebacker who has had one good season out of 4 so far. And we're expecting him he needs to be that level or higher on the Steelers. Like, his play can't go to Pittsburgh and drop off because he's getting paid like one of the top linebackers in the league now. He's like in that tier 2 of linebackers. The second reason is, you had a guy like Lloyd Cushenberry sitting there, and I think Cushenberry went for 12.4 per year for a 26-year-old center who is borderline like top 10 or 12 center in the league. Like, that would have been a better financial investment for my money than Patrick Queen, because you're getting the stability of that center position. And now what I worry about, Shayne, is the Steelers will pigeonhole themselves into taking a center out of necessity rather than being able to go BPA in the draft. And I think that, again, when you boil it down, free agency should be about filling needs. The draft should be about taking the best players at the most important positions. And I feel that with this signing, that may have not allowed the Steelers to go in a different direction, maybe with something like at center. But I think that Queen is going to be a good player. But if his play drops off at all, I'm not going to love what you're getting for the money. Now, my favorite thing about it, Shayne, you don't have to spend an early round pick on a linebacker now, which that draft capital is very valuable there. But I don't think I would have done that anyway. Even if Cole Holcomb isn't ready to come back, I think I would have just found a cheaper option in free agency. These guys are becoming so replaceable nowadays. Linebackers, safeties, and running backs. They're kind of in that trio there of guys that you can kind of either draft in the mid rounds and replace, or just get like stopgap guys in free agency. Like, their value has very much decreased in today's NFL. So I'm not a big fan of the money that was paid. I do like the structure of the contract. I do like that Steelers don't have to spend an early round pick on a linebacker, but I think I would have allocated my resources a little bit differently in free agency to make sure that I've got, and again, it ultimately too, Shayne, it doesn't help improve the offense. And your offense was one of the worst in the league last year. Your defense was already fairly good on paper. It was good in terms of points allowed. It was good in terms of DVOA and EPA. And that was with the linebacker injuries last year. So I just don't know how much linebackers move the needle unless you have a Roquan Smith or a Fred Warner, but we will see what Patrick Queen does for this team. So I'm going with a C+ there, and I am open to him changing my mind. I hope that he does early in the season. All right, let's do Deshaun Elliott, the safety the Steelers signed, formerly of the Miami Dolphins. What do you make of this pick? What grade would you assign?
This is an A for me, because you get him for 2 years, $6 million. He kind of goes into what you're talking about. Safety is undervalued at this point. They're kind of low value players in terms of free agency and the draft. So you can get a guy that played very, very well last year for Miami when he had to come in and play a lot of snaps. And we needed another safety that I was confident can go out there and do different things and kind of help Minka play the role that he should be playing, as that kind of field eraser, the guy who can be in the back end and take stuff away, be a playmaker again. And we've seen this happen on and off. Like, one year we see the 7 interceptions and the playmaking and all this stuff from Minka. And the next year it's like, well, we don't have anybody to do all these things, Minka. You have to go and do all this stuff. And now you can't do that anymore. And it just feels like it's this trade-off year over year. And I want that to stop. And I think at least for this year, and hopefully for the year after, depending on how he plays, this might allow Minka to do that. Because that's the only way you're going to get the full value of that contract we gave Minka, is by allowing him to play the game in his preferred way, right? So this deal, I'm hoping, can do that. If he plays like he did for Miami, there'll be no question about whether Minka is going to be able to play like that. And this might be one of the more undervalued signings, honestly, or underthought of signings around the league, because unlocking Minka's playmaking ability is how this defense goes from a really, really good unit it's been when he hasn't been that guy to one of the better units in the league. I think that's really kind of what separates those two tiers of defenses, is his ability to do those things.
Yeah, I agree. I give the Deshaun Elliott signing an A-. I think it's a really good move for the Steelers, especially for the price. You are getting a quality. I would label him as an above average starting strong safety in that role that can really come downhill and thump you. He's got good size and length. If he can stay healthy, I think that's the ticket for him. So assuming that he doesn't get banged up, that is a perfect counterpart that Minka needs that allow him to succeed in the back end. And we know that Minka's cap number, all of a sudden, it's really high. It's the way that the Steelers structured those first 2 years of that deal. But now we're looking at a cap number of like above 24 million, I think it is.
Something like that.
22 to 24 million. So we have to get that worth out of this guy that we know is an all-pro safety. He's done it 3 times. He's had some really, really great seasons. He needs to get back to that form. And obviously health comes with that too. He has 2 major injuries, knee injury and hamstring last year. So if he can stay healthy, that'll obviously attribute to that. But I like the Elliott signing a lot. I think that he's a notable upgrade from Keanu Neal and Devontae KZ there, that I just wasn't a fan of either one of those guys in their old age with their injury histories, and neither proved to do anything. Neal before the injury, and KZ, all of what he played last year for the team. So a fan of this one. Who else we got here? Let's talk about, let's just do the Dante Jackson. This is a trade, not a signing, but what do you make of this guy? And I know that, first of all, let me get your thoughts. Did the Steelers lose this trade, Shayne? And secondly, what do you think Dante Jackson's going to be for the Steelers this year?
So technically, I do think they lost the trade because they got the worst player and they didn't get much draft capital in return, right? So typically, if you're going to lose the player for player situation, you have to have it be, okay, we're getting a decent draft pick in response to that. Like, we're willing to take the downgrade at whatever position or whatever it is to
Mhm.
get the draft capital to go and upgrade the roster. This felt more like essentially a swap for players, right? And to me, obviously Deontay was probably gone after this year. That seems pretty likely. I understand that the offense hasn't been good with him, and maybe he's not the best fit for Arthur Smith's offense, right? Whatever. I just don't think Dante Jackson is a legit starting corner at this point in his career.
Mhm.
In terms of like, I want him out there as the second corner. I just don't know if that's what he is at this point, and I don't think he's going to play in the slot like we talked about earlier, in some previous shows, because he's never really done it, right? Like, not
Mhm.
saying he can't, I guess, but if he's going to be the second outside corner this year, I just don't know if that really is a huge improvement over what we got last year. And if you're going to
Yep.
trade Deontay and take that hit at receiver, I know it's a great receiver class. It's probably going to end up working out ultimately if they attack receiver, but it does create a hole that you now have to fill. And I don't know if it necessarily
Mhm.
filled the corner hole either. So
Yeah, I view Dante Jackson as a low end starter, but also a high variance corner where he can have really good games, he can have really bad games. And I think that's kind of just the nature of the position in general, but especially when you're 5'10" with short arms. I mean, you're always going to be at a disadvantage, even if you have 4.3 speed, because your positioning has to be so perfect. It's why a guy like Porter can get away with so much more, because just when you've got 100th percentile length at the position, I mean, your radius is just so much bigger to interrupt passing lanes. The problem with Dante Jackson is he's got the body type of a guy that should be a slot cornerback in the NFL. But like you said, he just does not play it. Like, he's primarily an outside corner, just a few snaps from the slot over the past 2 seasons and for most of his career, really. So I don't see him making that transition. Now, I know that Tomlin is unreasonably high on him, kind of like he was on William Jackson. I think that Dante Jackson is obviously better at this stage than what William Jackson was when the Steelers made that ridiculous trade for him a few years back. But I think that he's going to be a stopgap guy that they're going to be looking to replace probably by next season. But I do think he'll end up getting that starting gig opposite of Porter. I don't think that the Steelers, if I just had to guess right now, I don't think the Steelers are going to spend a high enough investment in the draft on cornerback to unseat him right now. What about Van Jefferson, Shayne? What do you make of that one?
I mean, he's a receiver 4, probably.
Yeah.
It's like it's a C. It doesn't matter to me that
Mhm.
much. Like, they needed to add bodies to the group, and the same thing kind of applies for another signing they made. But this probably, you hope this doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. Like, you don't want this guy to have to play a ton of snaps. He had some promise with the Rams as a second round pick. I think he was, however many years ago now, but
Mhm.
just didn't really move the needle there, and didn't really move the needle last year. So definitely feels just like a depth, like we need a receiver who can play type of signing. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a big Van Jefferson fan. Quez Watkins neither. I feel like neither of those players are needle movers. And what's interesting, Shayne, I'll pound out both of these at the same time. I'll give them both a D, because you're honestly just you're filling a spot for now. And I think that one of them doesn't make the team. If I had my early guess is that one of those guys isn't on the final roster, because neither play special teams at all. Like, they do not play special team snaps. The only one
nope.
that does is Watkins a little bit, because he has done some kick return stuff in the past, but he had one kick return for the Eagles in 9 games last year. So I think these guys are wide receiver 4s. I wouldn't call either of them a wide receiver 3, because the Eagles wanted to move. I know Eagles fans who were completely done with Quez Watkins. And for Van Jefferson, he graded out as one of the worst receivers in the NFL last year. And I just don't, I'm not a big fan of either one of these guys. I think that you legitimately still need a true wide receiver 2 at the very least, and probably a true number 3 option. Like, if between Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, and Calvin Austin, if those guys really are nothing more than that, I mean, you could look to upgrade that position as well. So that gets a D for me there. And we'll finish it off with Cordarrelle Patterson, who just was signed. What do you got?
Again, I think the fact it's a 2-year contract is a little interesting to me, considering his age and everything. So I'm going to give it a B, just because I don't know for sure that he's going to be the impact in the kick
Mhm.
return game that he used to be at his age. And you hope he still can be that, at least. And I think he's, as an RB3, there's nothing wrong with it. He can catch passes, he can run the ball a little bit. So it's nothing spectacular. At least I don't expect it to. Maybe he has a huge season with these new kick return rules, and then everybody's just like, oh man, this is a great signing. But realistically, he's probably just going to be a depth player slash special teamer that does pretty well. So
yeah, I would go with the B as well. It feels so different from like the previous RB3s the Steelers had on this roster, like a Benny Snell, where you don't come in, you don't touch the ball. You obviously can't do returns. You are just there to be like a core special teams defenseman. So I do think it's going to be a very different feel that way. And I'll be interested to see how much they try to get him the ball, but I would go a B just because of what we've seen from Patterson in the past. I do think that he has the potential, at least even in his old age now at 33, to be one of the better kick returners in the league still, just because he has so much experience there. And his track record is so good there. So I'll go a B on that one. All right, Shayne, do we have any winners and losers from free agency? So guys on the roster already that have maybe are in a better or worse position now than when things started. I'm thinking of a guy like Nate Herbig as a winner because the Steelers did not address the center position yet. And there's no guarantee that they're going to get one of the top options in the draft. I would have him listed as a winner. For what it's worth, ESPN has him pegged as a Steelers starting center at the moment, for lack of better options. And Herbig is only 25 years old. I think that's worth mentioning because he's already played 5 seasons in the NFL. He has 49 snaps at center under his belt, according to Pro Football Focus. I don't foresee him being that guy other than in a pinch, but I think at the very least, it makes him, for sure, he's going to be that interior guy that will swing all 3 of those positions right there.
Yeah, I think he's definitely one of the winners because, again, they haven't addressed interior positions at all. And it's not that they need to at guard necessarily, but haven't brought anybody in who can play center or guard or anything like that. I'd say, unfortunately, at least for now, I didn't expect them to make a move at this position until the draft anyway, but Dan Moore, until someone is drafted, is kind of a winner because we don't draft someone early, or if we do and there's someone who they want to sit at first, he's probably going to go out there again. And, for probably worse, but maybe better, that's kind of what it is at this point. Now, again, were they going to do that? No. Were they going to change anything there? Probably not, but it's interesting to note that. And then, obviously Harvin will be gone, with Johnston. He's definitely a loser in all aspects, unfortunately for him. Outside of that, I will say in general, if you are along the offensive line and you are worried about your standing, you don't have to be, right? Like, at least right now. It's going to be something that's changing in the draft, you hope, or it could be changing at center very soon, depending on what they want to do. We'll talk about that too. But in general, I think that a lot of the veterans on this team that maybe were worried about their spots don't have a ton to worry about quite yet.
Yeah, I agree. And Dan Moore is going to be sweating bullets on draft day. The Steelers don't go that route early.
I imagine so.
Yeah, he shouldn't. His play is not warranted a 4th starting season. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
The other guy that I would mention, Shayne, would be Mark Robinson, a guy that can potentially get bumped off the roster entirely, and a guy who ended up playing last year, and I just was not impressed with his play at all. So that Patrick Queen signing is bad news for his NFL career. I think that he is running out of chances here for sure.
I would agree. Yeah, I think that the linebacker room is going to look very different, not only this year, but probably the next year or two. Might be the only guy that might be there still is Queen, assuming his contract still looks good to them and they're willing to keep doing it. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Cole Holcomb, he was seen rehabbing with a sleeve over that left knee.
Yeah.
We didn't get to see a video, only saw a screenshot picture of him, but I'm wondering how that is progressing as well. I would love it if that injury wasn't as bad as feared. We know it's at least an ACL. We don't know what else is involved there because they never really gave specifics. But if he can come back there, I like the tandem of Queen and Holcomb out there with Roberts as your early down run stuffing linebackers. So we'll figure that out later on, I'm sure. Do you have a favorite offseason move of the Steelers so far, Shayne? Mine's pretty easy.
Favorite? I think just overhauling the quarterback room. As much as it's not as good of a scenario as I wish it was in terms of who's probably going to be playing, this needed to be addressed in some way. And it at least shows that they aren't going to do the send him out there for 4 years and then not pick up his 5th-year option thing they did with like Jarvis Jones and Artie Burns and all these other guys who just didn't have it. They recognized that Pickett probably wasn't going to be the answer. They go and address it in multiple ways. It gives themselves a chance to be competitive this year, and maybe with Fields they have a potential for upside. It's still not the best scenario because you're in the AFC, but at the same time, and I keep thinking about this, like, I don't know how many other things outside of maybe getting Kirk, which just wasn't going to happen with that contract when he wanted. Outside of that, is there anything they could do to be competitive at quarterback in the AFC this year? Probably not. So this at least gives them a higher, upside in terms of the quarterback position, just because of where Pickett was
Mhm.
at, and also gives them a chance to not be, in a position where they can't go and attack quarterback again very soon, because they don't owe these guys very much of anything long term.
Yeah, and that's what I like about it as well. My favorite move is Justin Fields trade. I mean, that
Yeah,
one to
right.
me is easy because
Nothing.
this is a guy I would have considered, Shane. I would have considered trading that second round pick for him. And a
Right.
third, it would have been
Exactly.
done.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I know that the Steelers ultimately gained draft capital going from Kenny Pickett to Justin Fields, which I don't
Which
think
is hilarious.
nobody would have ever predicted that.
No,
But I
no, I don't think.
still, I mean, hope that Justin Fields is a franchise quarterback is obviously running out. He's going into year 4 at this point, but the tools that you are getting with that are elite. And I think that he's a guy that I would be willing to gamble on and give him a shot, at least to see what he's got here in a new system. You surround him with different coaching staff and different talent. So that one I am very pleased with. I'd love to be able to see him get on the field. Obviously, I want the best guy out there. I mean, the Steelers have to win, Shane. I mean, they keep closing the door on one window after the next. Now you've got TJ Watt, who turns 30 years old this year. You got Cameron Hayward, who's going to be 35. And so the time is kind of now. Like, you got to make that push. And so I want them to go with the better quarterback. But I'm kind of hoping and quietly hoping that guy is Justin Fields, because there's just so much more to look forward to there if he happens to be a guy that shows promise. He's only 25. Russell Wilson's 35. And so I think that he's the one that has potential that you could sign to a second deal and get quality quarterback play from. Do you have a least favorite move of everything the Steelers have done so far?
This is kind of in one where I'm going to say it's my least favorite, just because they haven't done many things that are truly bad anyway. Choosing to sign Montravius Adams back and not Armon Watts confuses me a lot, especially
Mhm.
considering Watts is less
Yeah.
expensive. I just don't know. Like, Adams just to me isn't a player that needs to be on your roster. Like, it's not that he's so bad he can't play or anything like that. But I thought Watts was better last year. I think he's also, and he is, I think, like a year or so younger. Like, there's just not really anything to
Mhm.
me that screams like we had to have Adams back, but not Watts back. So that's really weird to me. I didn't love that. If they let both of them go, and they did pick up Dean Lowry for cheap, I'm sure. We haven't seen the contract yet, but it's another thing. Like, it's fine,
Mhm.
but just that felt weird to me that they did that.
Yeah, I agree. I know that those guys kind of had a little bit of a different role, obviously, on the Steelers defensive line, but
Right, but still.
Adams is a guy that gets moved around. Watts was a guy I thought played very well when he came in rotation last year. I certainly would have kept Watts over Adams. I think he's just the better football player at this point. So I agree with that one. My least favorite would probably be signing 2 receivers that are just, I mean,
Just
just
guys.
completely just bodies in there right now.
Yeah, they're just guys, yeah.
I don't value either one of those guys. I'm not high on either of them, and I wouldn't be upset if neither makes the team. I've seen enough from them over the years to know that they are wide receiver 4s at the very most. And my preference, Shane, if you're going to be a wide receiver 4, you better be able to play special teams, and neither offer
Yeah.
that ability at all.
Yeah.
So that's the part that's frustrating with that. What free agent move should come next now that we've done all this, Shane, and then we're going to put the focus on the draft here?
I think they need to address center in some way, shape, or form. That was someone that they think could potentially start. And I understand,
Mhm.
like, maybe they think Herbig can do that, right? Like, maybe that is the plan. Is like, well, if we don't get the center we want, or it's a reach or whatever else, we're okay with Nate's coming in playing center. I just don't want that to be the case, because we don't have enough experience from him at center. We don't know enough about him as a center. You at least need to bring in somebody who has started games at center in the NFL. Like, that's just what I think needs to happen. Even if that guy is one that is maybe a lower end starting center, it's at least one that has done it. Like, I think Brian Allen,
Mhm.
formerly of the Rams, I believe, is out there still.
Yeah.
He's played a good bit. Like, just somebody, even if it's Connor Williams, maybe the reason why he hasn't been signed is just his knee is bad, or whatever the deal is with his injury. Give him a chance on like a small
Mhm.
contract if no one else wants to do it, just to see if he can come in and be ready to go, whatever it ends up being, right? But I do think they need to do that at least prior to the draft, because then, like you said, good GMs tend to fill holes in a way
Mhm.
where, okay, we don't want to have to rely on this guy, but we're confident he can at least hold down the fort if we can't get a player
Yeah.
at the position we want. So that's something I think needs to come very quickly.
Yeah, 100%. It's center. I mean, I think the only other position you could argue out there right now maybe be slot cornerback, but you
Yes.
have to do something here at the center position. And the guy that I've had my eye on all along, even before the tampering period started, was Connor Williams. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
big Connor Williams fan when he plays. I thought he was perfect for that wide zone system with Mike McDaniel in Miami. And I think that he would fit in nicely with the Steelers, assuming the health stuff checks out. He had the ACL injury last year. And I think that that's the reason why he's not signed yet. He wants to show that his progress is coming along, and then maybe he'll ink a deal later in the summer.
Right. Maybe. Yeah.
That is a guy that I would prefer. I would love to have on my roster because it saves me from drafting the center position early. And I mean, if you look at, he graded out as the second best center halfway through the season last year. I just think that he's a good player. I've watched him all through his career in Dallas, and that's a guy that offers a lot of intrigue there with his size and ability to move. So center is something, whether it's Williams or not, they just need to get somebody there.
Right.
You can't go into the draft saying that we've got to draft a center early because it's Herbig or nobody. So, all right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers draft now and following the breadcrumbs to where this could lead us with the 20th overall pick in the first round this year. And maybe beyond in the following rounds. So Tomlin and Khan, let's talk about their scouting trail first of all, and it is very small this year. And to my knowledge, that there's only 4 schools that they've been to is Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, and Michigan. I think those are it so far. And obviously, we still have some pro days ahead of us here, like over the next 10 days. Once that is done, I don't know. I mean, everything we know from history so far. It's at least since Mike Tomlin has been here as the head coach in 2007, the Steelers do not draft players in the first round that they haven't had the head coach / general manager meeting with at their pro day. Like one of those guys or both need to be on hand at a player's pro day historically in the Tomlin era in order for that person to be considered a first round candidate. And so that makes the pickings really slim right now. Shayne, you're looking at guys from Georgia would be Amarius Mims. I think he'd probably be the only one from that program this year. Alabama, there's several in there. J.C. Latham, the offensive tackle, Terrion Arnold, maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry. You look at Clemson, you got Nate Wiggins there, the cornerback, and then Michigan. I don't think any of those guys would be a first round candidate. They're not going J.J. McCarthy. He's going to be gone by that point. So it really, really narrows down what the Steelers are going to do here if history repeats itself. Now, that's the question is if we're only the second year into the Omar Khan, Andy Weidel era. So, Shayne, do you see this trend continuing? And if so, which of these players do you think is highest on their radar?
So that's the question, like you said, is with the way the scouting trail has been for them. Now, there's been circumstances where like the league meetings are going on right now. So not like at LSU's pro day. Like so, Brian Thomas Jr., for example, is a guy that they met with at the combine that there seemed to be some interest in. Like maybe the receiver is in play for round 1. If history holds, probably not. At least not him, right? And we saw like A.D. Mitchell, Texas, they didn't go to their pro day. Like, and a lot of the pro days have been scheduled on the same day, and it made it difficult for them to be at multiple pro days and see some of these guys. So there's a chance, I think, more so than maybe ever, that we don't get the first round pick from a school that they did go and visit them at, right? But I still think it's likely because some of the players that they have seen are some of the most commonly mocked players to them. And I think there's a reason for that. Even before they went to the pro days, like there was reasons for them to be interested in these players. Now, I will say the last time that they didn't take a first-round pick that they were at the pro day for, I believe was David DeCastro, and that's because it was Stanford, and we know they don't like going, west very much at all, right? That's just not what they do. So that was a unique situation where I think they just thought the player was so good that there's no reason they shouldn't take him. But in general, it's going to be typically, since at least 2012 now in that case, you need to be at the pro day, you need to be an official visit, all that stuff. Of those guys, I think it's still Mims to me. I think it just makes too much sense when you think of where they're at as a team, what they need on offense, what it would do for Broderick Jones to have a teammate in there too, and they've already been around each other. They play opposite spots. Like that would be the one that I'm looking at the most. But really, like, I don't think Kool-Aid at 20 is impossible. I do think it's a reach in that case for me, but it makes sense schematically for what they
Mm.
do. Wiggins' weight kind of bothers me, and I'm a little worried about that, but they clearly are interested in him, or at the very least interested in Clemson's program, as we know. So, like, those guys are all in there, but it's still possible that we see, depending especially where they go the rest of the cycle, that there could be a first round potential player, not where they go
Mm.
to the pro day for. So,
Yeah, Shayne, I'm just gonna go out and say I think that they're eyeing offensive tackle in the first round.
right,
I think that the chips are lining up this way. They weren't at Brian Thomas and AD Mitchell's pro day,
right,
and Xavier Worthy as well at Texas. Those are 3 first round potential options at receiver that are, I don't want to say completely off the board, because again, we were looking at a
right.
different era here. It might not be the same as before, but you would think that they would have shown a little bit more interest if in some of those, like the Texas one. I don't believe there was anything interfering with that one, right? For them to be a Texas pro
I
day.
don't think so. No.
So it makes me think that because they were there to see Mims, because they were there to see Latham, they brought in Talisi Fuaga for a top 30 visit. And now we've learned that they just brought in Amarius Mims for a top 30 visit. So Mims is a box checker. He's checking every one of those boxes. It feels a lot like it did last year, honestly, with Broderick Jones, Paris Campbell, Anton Harrison. Like, it feels like one of those things where they are, I mean, they're interested in getting that bookend tackle back-to-back years. You take care of the tackle position, you don't have to worry about it for a while. So that's my early guess where they are heading this way, based on the teams that they have visited and have not visited. And they were not there for Jackson Powers Johnson's pro day. Now, look, I know that one was it like the second day of free agency or something that way. So it was right in the rush of the madness. So I understand if they didn't go there. However, if I want to use another example, Shayne, a couple of years ago in 2021, they sent an O-line coach out, and I think this assistant O-line coach, I think Sean Surratt was there as well, to see Creed Humphrey, and they did not send Tomlin and Kahn, even though they could have been there for that. They chose not to go. And what they do, they passed on Humphrey twice in the draft for Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth, even though Pouncey had just retired and you had a glaring need at center. So it goes to show that there is value in the history of this stuff. Now, the reason why I think it holds so much weight still, Shayne, Mike Tomlin is the head honcho here. Like this, nothing gets done in this organization without his say. And we know more than any other head coach in the league, this guy loves to be on the scouting trail and he loves to have his hand in that draft process. And so I just don't see that part going away. Now, maybe it's going to be more give and take, and maybe there'll be a little bit more back and forth now with Kahn and Weidel trying to get their input in here. But I still feel like Tomlin wants that say at the end of the day. So is he going to feel comfortable with taking a player in the first round that they did not meet with at their pro day? I think the important thing here, Shayne, is if you don't get a pro day visit, or you are not a top 30 pre-draft visit, you are not on the radar. And I will be proven wrong that way. Go ahead. I will go out on a limb to say that's just not happening. Like the Steelers are not drafting you at pick 20 if you're not at the pro day or you don't get a pre-draft visit, regardless of if they saw them at the combine or Senior Bowl. I just don't think that holds enough weight. And why wouldn't you? Like, if the first round pick you can't afford to mess up, why wouldn't you use one of those 30 visits on a player that you were seriously considering? So we need to figure out, like, is Jackson Powers Johnson a 30 visit for the Steelers? I think that's a big one, because if he's not, you can mark him off. He's not going to be that guy. And for what it's worth for him, heard some scary medicals on Jackson Powers Johnson. I don't know what I'm allowed to share right now, so I'm not going to say anything yet, but I'm sure those will be coming out at some point. So just a little inside info there. I think that's important too, though, because it shows you, are the Steelers interested in taking a center in the first round? Or is it like the study that Andrew False did, our contributor, that showed that the average center drafted in the first 2 days typically goes around pick 60. So the Steelers, maybe they're thinking in their mind, we can wait and we can get a Zach Frazier at pick 52 or pick 51 instead. And so I'll be interested to see that. But I think where the breadcrumbs are leading right now, Shayne, is to the offensive tackle position in the first round. Do you agree with that?
For sure, because it's Mims. Latham was at the Alabama Pro Day. Like, those are the two of the guys that I think are definitely in play, and I think the corners are in play too. It feels like it's going to be either offensive tackle or defense, most likely corner. And that's kind of been what a lot of people have been saying since the season ended, like are two of our biggest needs. And even though Dante Jackson's brought in, I don't think that removes that corner need, is offensive tackle and corner. Right now, receivers jumped up there because of the Deontay Johnson trade and everything else, but it doesn't seem so far that the receivers are a huge priority to them, at least the top guys. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how the rest of the pro days go out and like how they where they go and what happens there, because that'll kind of finalize that initial list of guys we should be looking at for the first pick.
Yeah, Shane, and one other element of this, because I know that there's been a lot of receiver talk about the Steelers in the first round.
Yeah.
I think they're going there probably with their second pick or early in the third round, because if you look at, again, all of these visits, they all kind of all lead to the same point. And so far, the Steelers, they've used top 30 visits on Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall, and Malachi Corley.
Yeah.
Those are all day 2 receivers and potentially early day 2 receivers.
Yep.
And so it certainly seems like the Steelers are more interested in doing that. You combine that with the fact that they didn't have a presence at LSU's pro day and Texas's pro day. That goes to show that they're probably looking more so towards day 2, which even solidifies the thought that it could be offensive tackle in the first round for this team. I also wanted to share this, Shane. I'm in the middle of doing a little bit of study on looking what the Steelers could be looking for at the tackle position. There's 2 schools of thought here. In one hand, you've got new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. He's coming in, bringing this wide zone scheme. If you look at his offensive tackles in Atlanta, not big guys. I mean, Jake Matthews, not a big football player, not necessarily long, but guys that can move well laterally, get out in split space and reach block. On the other hand, it does seem like Omar Khan and Andy Weidel are fans of like these mammoth type offensive tackles. You look at Weidel's history when he was in Philadelphia. He drafted Jordan Mailata, who is one of the biggest tackles in the league at 6'8" and 350-ish pounds. And he's had a lot of success with him. Last year, the Steelers tried to sign Orlando Brown Jr., ultimately went to Cincinnati Bengals. Orlando Brown is 6'7" and 7/8 and 345 pounds with long arms. So far, Shane, the tackles that they've looked at either at the pro day or for a pre-draft visit, they've all been taller than 6'5", and they've all weighed more than 324 pounds. So, and those guys are Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, Talisa Fuaga, and Travis Glover, who is a lesser known offensive tackle, but is still 6'6" and 338 pounds. These are big, long football players. The only one that doesn't really meet that length description there is Fuaga, but I think he's just such a good prospect that the Steelers want to do their due diligence in case he ends up sliding in the draft. So if you're wondering what types of tackle they're looking at, it appears that they are more interested in these big, powerful right tackle types rather than the nimble-footed blindside protectors. I think Broderick could play either way, Shane, but no visit with Olafashanu and didn't have a big presence at his Penn State Pro Day. The same can be said about Troy Fatanu right now, who has not received a top 30 visit. So until we see that happen, I think not only can we narrow it down that Steelers are looking for tackle, I think we can narrow it down the type of tackle they're looking for.
I think so too. And it makes sense because Broderick, while he is kind of known more for his run blocking at this point, I do think that he has all the athleticism needed to be a left tackle, and he was one until he moved to the right. So he's definitely more of the blindside protector type. And then you look at Latham, Mims, guys like that. Now, Mims has great athleticism, but I do think he profiles more as a powerful kind of road grading type of player if he reaches the ceiling. And Latham especially so is more of that just big, powerful body you have to get around. It's one of the reasons why I was curious if they were going to go after Trent Brown, who now is a member of the Bengals, which is I do not love that for us because I think he's going to be their best right tackle they've had in a while. But that was why I was wondering. I'm like, maybe they go that route. Maybe tackle isn't a huge need then, but no, they decide that they're not going to target that. So I'm expecting that type of tackle. We'll see if they do bring in anyone else that's a little different than that. But I think the long, powerful guys are definitely what they're looking for, which I think is right for what they need. So,
yeah, but I do think this dynamic is so interesting, Shane, because that just doesn't seem those guys that the Steelers are looking at right now. They don't seem like the ideal like wide zone fit tackles. Like typically you want those guys to be better movers than the size.
Mims, I think can do it. I think Mims can. I think Latham would be the one where if they take him, I'd be like, I don't really know what the idea is there. But again, at the same time, we've kind of been talking about this throughout this whole process of bring Arthur Smith in and bring everybody in. the quarterbacks don't really fit him either. So I don't really know if that matters. Like, I'm not sure if they're
Yeah.
prioritizing that, which obviously in your head, you're like,
Mhm.
that doesn't sound good. But maybe Smith is going to be adjusting his offense a little bit. Maybe we're going to see some different stuff from him than what we've seen in the past. And the problem with that is, like, I don't know if he's good at anything besides the stuff he's done. So, like, it kind of, no matter how you look at it, it's either, okay, they're bringing guys who don't seem like fits, but maybe Smith is just going to make it work, or they're just not prioritizing it,
Mhm.
or Smith is going to change things up, in which case I'm kind of interested in that. But also, how is he mixing it up? Like, what is he going to do differently? Do I like that or not? We really won't know that until we kind of get into the
Mhm.
season and see what they're doing. But I will say, especially
Yeah.
Latham, if that was the pick, I'd just be like, all right, is he going to play guard for some reason? Like, are we going to, like, because that would probably be the only position he could play on this line where I'd be like, okay, that, I guess that works, even though the feet are
Mhm.
still going to be slow even for a guard. But yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think that if the idea is we're prioritizing talent over scheme fit, I love it, because you always
That's,
should.
yeah, I'm
Like,
fine
to
with that.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, you shouldn't draft a player just because, oh, well, we got Arthur Smith. We need to make sure we have a guy that only fits his scheme, and we're disregarding the quality of player he is.
Right.
To me, if you are a really talented player, then you should be, for the most part, you should be pretty scheme proof. And I want the Steelers to have that mindset. I love what they did in the draft last year. Like, I think they
Yes.
crushed the draft. I said it right at the time. Almost every single pick that they made in that draft was well above value in terms
Yes.
of where I had them. And I think the outlook is extremely promising, one of the most promising drafts of this past decade. And so
Yeah.
if they take that same approach again and say, hey, I know that some of these guys might not be the best Arthur Smith scheme fit, they're just the best players. And
Right.
that's the approach that they should have. So I'm very pleased with that. Let's talk about the best overall options that could possibly be there for the Steelers, and of the guys that maybe they could potentially consider outside of the names that we just mentioned, Shayne, with the Armarius Mims. I know you and I both are fans of Amarius Mims. What other players could they be looking at with the 20th pick that would be like the best overall options?
I mean, I don't expect this to happen, but I would love if, like, a guy like Arnold fell to 20. Maybe the corner runs a little
Okay.
weird and he ends up at 20. One of the very top corners, if they're still there, and if the tackle run happens a little earlier than people are expecting, I could see that being the case with, like, okay, well, we kind of want tackle more, but the players at corner are just better than the tackles, so let's just take a
Mm-hmm.
corner. Like, someone, so that could be, probably, I can't imagine Quinyon Mitchell. I don't know how early he's going, but I don't think it's going to be any later than, the mid, like, teens, and definitely not 20. Arnold, I could see, like, the workout was just, man, in terms of his, like, overall athleticism, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't care about that, because you look at the tape and you're like, all right, yeah, that guy's great. He was more smooth than, like, super explosive, which at corner, especially if you have good technique and everything, I'm not worried about him getting blown by or anything like that, right? Like, I'm not worried about that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that. Receiver is still in play. Like, it depends on where they go the rest of the cycle. I don't think, like, they met with the Doomsday at the Common, which is kind of what started this whole, like, oh, maybe they really
Yeah.
are in the top receivers. He's not making it past probably
No.
6. I don't think. I think, especially if the quarterbacks go, I think if the Giants are sitting at 6 still, he's probably the best player on the board. They take him there. So, not worried about him being there, unfortunately. But maybe some of these other receivers that maybe people are
Mm-hmm.
kind of pegging as round 2 guys, maybe the Steelers really like them. Like, I think end of first round is the range for a lot of, like, the McConkeys of the world and, like, the Ricky Pearsalls and stuff like that. Like, end of first, early second is where their range starts. But hey, maybe they love one of those guys enough to take him to 20. I wouldn't love that if it's not one of the top guys, but I could see all those things happening for sure.
Yeah, I think in terms of best options for me, outside of the names that we already mentioned, Shane, and you talked about Arnold, I think Arnold would be a very
He'd be
solid
awesome.
pick
Yeah,
there.
he'd be awesome.
Not the very different player than like a Devin Witherspoon, but you talk about just a natural football ability, a
Mhm.
smooth player. I'm not worried about the testing numbers. I think he's
No.
just, the floor is very high with a reasonably high ceiling as well in the NFL. Two names that I would mention would be Ola Fashanu and
Right.
Troy Patanu, because
Yes.
those
Yeah,
are the left tackle types. Now, if you draft either of those guys, you're probably leaving Broderick Jones at right tackle.
which, yeah.
I would be okay with that if you're getting these nimble-footed, like that. And both of these guys are better pass protectors than they are run blockers, which is maybe is
Yes.
why the Steelers haven't brought them in for a visit,
Yeah.
or might not be as
Yeah.
interested. But I do like both of them as prospects. I think that Fashanu is the high upside prospect who could be just like a really good pass protector for a long time in the NFL, where Troy Fatanu, I feel like, is already an established player. I think you can plug him right in. He could be good right away. If you ever needed to play him at like left guard or something that way, you could do that as well. But I think that he checks the box with those movement skills, that size and length. And I do think both of those guys would be scheme fits for Arthur Smith, as opposed to some of those bigger tackles that might not be as good of a scheme fit. And here's a wild card, Shayne. I think the chances are extremely slim, but this team was at Georgia's Pro Day. Arthur Smith was talking to Brock Bowers. I don't think they go that route, but he's a glorified receiver in my mind. Like there were reports that he was playing at 6'3" and 225 pounds, and he's not that 243 pound tight end or whatever. Doesn't really matter to me. I think the guy is generationally good after the catch. Like I think he could be your Deebo Samuel in this wide zone offense, in Arthur Smith's offense for him. So that intrigues me a lot. I just think he's going to go sooner. And if he's not gone by like pick 18, like if the Bengals don't snatch him up, I would be floored, I think, at that point. So he's going to be one of my favorite overall players in this draft. And so he's a guy that I'd probably run to the podium for if he happened to slip that far. Again, I don't see it happening. But if we're talking best possible case scenarios here, and there's a chance that people go with needs over BPA, maybe tight end's not as big for them, I would love it. So those are the guys that I have on my list. If you guys here have any other players that you would like to see the Steelers pick at 20 overall, please drop them in the chat. Now that the dust is settled on the free agency period, Shayne, we're going to be putting all this focus on the draft in the coming weeks here in this month leading up to the draft. So I'm really excited for our future shows. We go live on YouTube every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So please make sure you mark your calendars, tell your friends, and join us. Hit like and subscribe, please, to help us out. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.